We have a real problem. My wife tells me with a serious face. I know real problems. I don't like real problems. And just like that, I have a flashback to when my mom was raising us in Colombia. As a single mom, she struggled to make ends meet. She had to toss a coin to decide which utility service would get paid, and none of them were ever current. So the decision was more which one will be less behind. It is tough to decide whether to pay the water or the electricity. That will never be a board game. If anything, it would be a sick would you rather. Would you rather be cold or stinky? When the electricity fell behind, the utility company would send a technician to our house to cut some hardware. So we had no power and we couldn't easily reconnect it. After that, my mom would go to a part of the city known as Miami Caño. Miami evokes images of tall palm trees, attractive men and women skating while holding cocktails with tiny umbrellas. But the word caño means sewage. Miami Caño is a creative way to describe a sketchy area of town in Barranquilla where you could find shady characters who could reconnect your power. Their qualifications were that they were willing to do it. That was it. We were part of a community with 22 families, and they couldn't care less if we plugged the power back illegally. But whenever we interrupted their services, they would get really upset, which we often did because these electricians weren't great. These illegal reconnections were happening throughout the city, and one time we were reinstalling the power. The local news station sent a crew to produce a segment on what we were doing. Even if our neighbors were mad at us, we were still part of the group and the TV crew wasn't. Our neighbor from across the hall, Cesar, was there. All the boys in our neighborhood liked Cesar. But we were afraid of him because he had terrible mood swings, a side effect of what can be medically described as smoking a tons of pot. That day I looked at him from our apartment window, chasing the cameraman with a broom. When he finally caught up with him, he gave him a whack so hard he broke the broom in two. The cameraman took it like a champ. Don't get me wrong, he cried like a baby, but he never let go of the camera. How professional. Even in my early teens, I looked at all that and thought, this is not part of that guy's job description. I returned to the present and asked my wife, what is the real problem? She told me, our youngest daughter, Amelie, was in the backyard mixing her half-inch river pebbles with our 1-inch shadow bark, and it was going to be really hard to separate them again. Let me repeat. I have a backyard in Sonoma County. My life is good. I have this annoying habit. When she tells me hyperbolic catastrophes, I'll dig into my past and bring out a memory I have never shared with her about my upbringing. Like this. Once, when I was a teenager, I finished my dinner, but I was still hungry, so I looked around the house, but there was no more food anywhere. I didn't want to bother anyone, so I went and lay in my bed, hoping to fall asleep while I clutched my stomach. When my mom came home from work, she found me in my room crying because for the first time in my life, I was going to bed hungry. And let me stop right here. Don't feel bad for me. I also have a front yard. My life is good. My mom said, Carlos Eduardo, no seas bobo. She called me a dummy and told me to get up and sit at the table. I don't know how, but she pulled enough masa to make 2 arepas, and I went to bed with a full belly. I never had to know what it was like to go to bed hungry, thanks to my mom. Years later, I found out my mom went to bed hungry because she gave me her food. I don't know what you call how we were growing up. My mom would never say we were poor, and maybe we weren't. At least not in the way that people can be poor in Colombia. We always had a roof over our head. My sister and I never went hungry. And most of the time, all of our utility services worked simultaneously. Not legally, but still. It doesn't matter what anyone would call it. One of the only perks of growing up the way that I grew up is that when people tell me that they have a real problem, and they tell me the real problem, I can look at them and say, that's not a real problem. That's barely a nuisance of living a good life with a backyard and a front yard.